So let's get started. So my name is Ingrid Seim. I am a psychological coach and I'm the founder of Avenues Consultancy and Coaching. And I always kind of tell people this, the reason I called my coaching practice Avenues, apart from the fact that I wasn't sure that people would know how to pronounce my name if I called it after myself. But it's, you know, what I'm about, and I think what coaching is really about is to show people that there are many different avenues that we can take in life, and that you always have the opportunity to take a new one if that's, you know, the right thing for you to do at the right time. And that's both in terms of our thinking patterns, and in terms of the choices we make in life. And we'll get to this when we talk a little bit more about imposter syndrome today, about the way we can work with our thinking patterns around how we feel and what we do. So I'll be keeping to the 40-minute slot. I know this is your lunch break for a lot of people, and I don't want it to run over. I'll go through a few things. You can use the chat box. Christina will keep an eye on it. And then towards the end, we can do a bit of a Q&A if you like to, and if we have time, okay? And also feel free to reach out to me afterwards if you have any questions, if you want to explore some of what I'm talking about further, okay? You'll have my contact details at the end, and you know, you can see me on LinkedIn, or Christina can put me in touch with me, okay? So I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome, and I always get a lot of engagement when I talk about this topic, which I guess is not really surprising, because as we know, and I mentioned this a few times already before we even start, that 70% of us are likely to at some point in our life experience imposter syndrome. So what is it? It's that feeling that, you know, no matter what you've achieved in life or where you are, you don't really deserve to be there, that you're not really the right person, you know, in that kind of position, that other people that in your position that you compare yourself to are, like, know, better or deserve it more, or they're more clever than you. You know, you're fraud, and somebody at some point will find out, and they'll ask you a question, or it'll become obvious and apparent to everybody else that you're really just winging it and you haven't the clue, right? So I'm not sure how many of you this resonates with, if it's 70% or more. Well, what I'll do today is I'll look at some of the background and the theories behind imposter syndrome, and you know, where it comes from, bit of the background to it, and then we'll look at what's probably most important, which is to, you know, what can we do about it? What can we do to overcome it? Because really, it's not a nice feeling to have, you know, to feel like a fraud, or that, you know, just looking over your shoulder, that somebody's going to find out that you're not really as clever as it might seem, or whatever. So, you know, we deserve better than that, really. So I look at some techniques and some ways we can reframe that whole experience. Also, it's really hard not to use the camera as a mirror, so I'll try not to do that. So I might hide the camera, actually. There we go. Okay, that's better. So I think we often think of imposter syndrome as mainly something that women suffer from, at least more than men. And there's probably several reasons for this. Some of it might be that when this was first identified as a phenomenon in the 1970s, so two American psychologists, Pauline Clancy and Susanne Imes, they did a study, and they interviewed high-achieving female students I can't actually remember which university, but in one of the high-standing universities in the States. And they realized that so many of these very successful, very bright and clever female students felt like frauds, felt like they didn't deserve their place. And based on that study and their findings from it, they kind of made a conclusion that this is a syndrome that mainly affects professionally successful women, and I think that's what a lot of us associated with even today. But there's been more research done since then, a lot of research on imposter syndrome, and we know now that men are also probably equally impacted by it. But the thing is, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons that why we don't really still recognize it as equally occurring in men and women, is that men and women tend to behave differently when dealing with imposter syndrome. So, and I mean, as with everything gender, this is a generalization, okay? Like, it's based on averages and statistics and studies and surveys. It's not a binary thing, and people are on different levels on the spectrum. You don't necessarily always adhere to, you know, what I will now say that men do with imposter syndrome, and the other way around. There would be no point in doing psychology if we could just divide people up into neat brackets like this. So I just always find, I like saying that when I talk about things especially to do with gender. But oops, sorry, men anyway. Women tend to deal with it, imposter feelings by, I think this is what we mostly associate with imposter syndrome, is you know, with women withdraw, right? We think the behavior is kind of cautiousness, withdrawal, and avoidance of risk, back into your safe space, okay? And that's where feel the fear and do it anyway comes from, which is actually a very good coaxing technique to help deal with imposter feelings. And a lot of what I do later is related to that. But men, research has shown that men tend to engage in risk-taking behavior. Like, they show high levels of impulsivity. They have a need for change, you know, change and movement, taking risks. And if you look around you, like, this is the behavior we tend to reward, especially in business. So, you know, if you look at a lot of the successful, say, male business stories or business heroes, entrepreneurs out there, that's the kind of behavior they engage with. Now, they may or may not have imposter syndrome, I don't know, but I think it's quite important to note that it can kind of go under the radar in men, because, you know, we don't write books about how men need to change to become more successful in business, really, you know. Whereas the female version of it, we recognize as a problem that needs fixing more. And there's pros and cons to this, yeah, because, you know, as I said, imposter syndrome is not a pleasant emotion, and it can hold you back. It's a good thing to get help with, but because we mainly associate it with women, it buys into this notion that women need to be fixed, that, you know, we're not quite complete yet, that that we need to do all this work before we can get to where the men already are, right? And that's not very helpful, and it's not a narrative that I'm not a big fan of that narrative. But equally though, for men, because if you are suffering from imposter syndrome, you engage in these behaviors, they're not really recognized. You mightn't even be aware of it yourself, that the imposter syndrome is the underlying cause of some of your behavior. It might lead to external success, but you might still struggle with insecurities internally, you know. And whereas, you know, you mightn't even have the insights into your own behavioral patterns, whereas women do, and women talk about it, and women can reach out for more help. So there's room for improvement on both sides of the spectrum here, okay? I guess a lot of what I am talking about, and a lot of the techniques I'll be talking about, require an awareness of that you're suffering from imposter syndrome in the first place. But I think the more we talk about men, and also I think it's probably changing a bit now, because there's more of an embracement of vulnerability in leadership, and no matter how high up on the ladder. And I think also the pandemic and the changes we've all had to go through allows us to embrace the softer feelings or the more vulnerable feelings, which is only a good thing. So anyway, both risk-taking or withdrawal in this context, they are coping mechanisms, and they don't really deal with the underlying issue. So I said I was going to talk a little bit about why we suffer from imposter feelings. So I jumped the slide a bit too quickly there, but that doesn't matter. There was a lot of research done on this at the start, I think, because people wanted to find out where is this coming from and what can we do about it. And initially, they thought it could have to do with family dynamics. And I think if you grow up in an environment where a lot of the validation you get is based on what you achieve and how you behave, rather than, you know, your own intrinsic worth as a person, that's certainly an environment where there's room for imposter syndrome to set in and grow. Okay, but there's so many people suffering from various versions of imposter syndrome, and we're all individuals. So subsequent research hasn't really been able to pinpoint like this happened and this is why you're now suffering from imposter syndrome. I think we all have individual causes and triggers. It's a form of insecurity, whatever that insecurity is rooted in for you. Okay, and it might be beneficial to try and pinpoint that in order to better deal with it. But I think what we're going to do now is look at how to deal with it rather than figuring out where it's coming from. Okay, I'm going to present some tips and techniques. I have 6 steps. They're not really like steps in the sequence, they're just separate areas to focus on. Okay, and some might be more relevant to you than others, but they're all important. Okay, and if this was a workshop, I think with more time, I would get people to pick a scenario that for them is where you typically feel like an imposter, and then we could work through that in real time, yeah, using the techniques I'm going to show you. But we don't really have time for that right now, or in this forum. But if you want to take a minute before I get going onto it, and I'm going to talk about fixed and growth mindset as well now before we move into the steps, to think of a situation that tends to trigger imposter feelings for you. It might just be useful for you to keep that in mind while I go through some of the tips and techniques. Okay, so I'm catching up with my slides finally. So growth mindset. So you may or may not be familiar with this concept of growth mindset and fixed mindset. So it was coined by Carol Dweck, who is another American psychologist, and it kind of relates to how we feel about effort and failure and learning. Okay, and there is a link between that and imposter syndrome. So Carol Dweck, she wanted to study how people dealt with failure. So she got all these kids in and she did a study. She gave them puzzles to solve, and they were easy at the start, and then they became quite harder. And she presumed that some people would cope with failure and some people wouldn't, and she was going to study that. But what she realized was that some of these kids actually like really embraced failure. They saw it as an opportunity. They and this quote are going, "Oh my God, I love a challenge," one of them said, and kind of threw himself into solving whatever puzzle it was. And another one said, "Oh, I was really hoping that I'd learn something from this and that it would be informative." And she was floored by it, really, because she didn't really expect to see that embracing of failure as a stepping stone to a better thing. So that's where the growth mindset come from. So if you have a growth mindset, you believe that intelligence and talent are things that can be nurtured, that actually need to be nurtured through failure, or through effort and dedication, and that you need to work on things. That's the whole point of it, and that failure really is just a temporary setback and an opportunity to learn. And if you think of things like sports, or you never start out running a marathon straight away. You keep going at it. Whereas people with a fixed mindset, you view your abilities as like a fixed entity, and the very fact that you have to exert effort means that you're not good enough, and failure becomes another proof that you're not good enough, that you're inadequate. And you can see how that stunts growth, really, more than anything else. And you can also see how you can look at a situation and feel that you'll never be able to overcome it. And it kind of goes without saying then that the link here is that if you have a fixed mindset, you're more prone to imposter syndrome, right? It doesn't mean that all of us have fixed mindsets, because if you think of the figure, 70% of us don't have fixed mindsets, okay? I see it more as an opportunity to reframe the way we interpret our imposter feelings, because I think when we feel, I don't know, threatened or likely to be found out or something like that, we kind of jump into the fixed mindset, even though we're not really like that in our day-to-day lives, right? We might be embracing growth in a lot of things. And I think if we can remember those learnings from that are associated with growth mindset and apply that to the situations that we find ourselves in when the imposter syndrome starts kicking in, it's easier to reframe. We can go, oh, actually, I have a learning opportunity here. I feel nervous now, but maybe that just means that I'm stretching myself and I can learn from it. Anyway, we are moving on to the 6 steps, okay? First, I have acknowledge your feelings. And to me, this is really important, because I think before we can do any real work on thoughts or reframing or doing things differently, we kind of owe it to ourselves to really look at the feeling that's underneath all our thoughts of I don't really know what I'm doing, okay? And those feelings can be different. They can be feeling of nervousness, they can be sadness, fear, whatever it is for you. You don't really need to do anything with that feeling. But I think sometimes we don't even really look at it, because we're already jumping to the conclusions that we're not good enough, or we don't deserve to be where we are, right? We never deserve that promotion. They must have picked up somebody else's application by mistake, all those things. And I think in all my work, I always get people to acknowledge the underlying feeling before we do anything else, because those feelings are kind of precious, and just take the time to figure out what that feeling is. And when you've done that, you can start maybe seeing how that can open you up to other ways of dealing with what you have in front of you. All right. Which then leads me to the reframing of your thoughts. Okay. I'm a big advocate of reframing your thoughts. I think you'll find that most coaches are. That's kind of a lot of what we do in our work with people. And so we're not setting about necessarily to change your feelings. Your feelings are what they are, but the thoughts you have around them is what's going to determine how you deal with this in the future. I like that quote, change your thoughts and you will change your world. So say, for instance, say my feeling is nervousness, right? So sure, I get nervous before every time I give a talk or webinar or whatever, right? So that's the feeling. Now, an imposter syndrome thought would be, okay, that feeling means that actually I obviously haven't a clue what I'm doing. I shouldn't be nervous. If I knew what I was doing, I wouldn't be nervous, right? And I'm sure other people aren't. And yeah, I'm somebody's going to ask me a question I don't know the answer to, and maybe there's somebody here who knows more than about imposter syndrome with me, or all of those things. So if I wanted to reframe those thoughts, which is what I don't actually think those thoughts, okay? I think this instead. I think, well, actually, I always get nervous before I speak. And most of the time it goes okay. And if it doesn't, sure, it's not the end of the world anyway, yeah? And the nervousness is really just a sign that I take this seriously. I want to do a good job. People are coming here to listen to me. They want to get something out of it. It just means that I really respect my audience, really, I guess. And also, I know that 70% of everybody else are likely to have imposter syndrome too. So if they're all thinking it, then what is it that I'm really afraid of? Who am I nervous about? Maybe they're thinking the same about me. And I have a little graphic at the end of this presentation that illustrates that thought, okay? So reframing your thoughts is something that can be easy to do in theory. It's hard to do if you don't really believe it, okay? So there's other things that I'm going to go through that you might want to do before you get to this point. And maybe it would be better to put reframe your thoughts at the end, but I kind of wanted to put it out there because it is such an important framework for what it is that we're trying to do here. Which brings me to recognize the learning opportunity, which is where growth mindset really comes into it. And it's like there's likely that there's people out there that know more than you, or that maybe are better than you, or maybe more intelligent, although that's a hard scale to measure really, because we can be intelligent in so many ways, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if you're like starting a new job. You wouldn't want to be already better than the people who've been there for like 5 years. What's the point in, why? Like, that makes no sense. So instead of being completely intimidated by other people, maybe just recognize that you can learn something from them. There's some sort of quote about the best thing you can do for your career or something is to be next to the most intelligent person in the room or work with the most intelligent person in the room, because they will lift you up. Yeah. So it's a great opportunity. So again, if we can reframe that thought of, oh my God, they know more than me. If you can get to the point where you can go, great, I can learn so much, that's already a win for you. Okay. And this goes both ways, because chances are that they will learn something from you. Nobody knows everything. You know something that other people don't. Trust me on this. I have never come across a case where that isn't true. Okay, and I think if we stop kind of buying into our fears, I think we know that as well. I remember when I did my undergrad many years ago, the system at the University of Oslo where I did it was such that you did like joint degrees, so you did one course and then you could pick any other course. So the course I did in my first year, somebody else could do it in their fourth year. It was a different system to here, but it meant that when I did English as my first in my first year, but there was people doing the same class as me who might be in their fourth year, because you kind of bricked up your whole degree was based on modules like that. And I realized then that they knew stuff that I didn't know, but maybe that was just because the year before they'd done a course in something completely different, and suddenly they could have all these opinions about, you know, Marxist influence on the English novel or whatever. And I was like initially quite intimidated and going, they know so much. But then I realized that actually they know that because they have done a different course. And if I did that next year, I'd be in the same position. And it was a real eye-opener to me, I think, that people have these pockets of knowledge, and it's nothing to be intimidated by. You can just learn from it, and you can catch up with people as well, you know. So just keeping an eye on the time, we are doing okay. So we are, yeah, recognize the learning opportunity. Validate your lived experience, or own your lived experience. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that, because I'm not sure that that's so obvious. I think a lot of imposter feelings come from the fact that we have this image in our head about what something should look like, yeah? Like what a manager looks like, or what a successful person looks like, or maybe more importantly, what it should feel like to be one of those, yeah? And I often think of those female students in that very first study, right? I mean, there was probably not that many of them in whatever university they're in the 70s, yeah? They were probably told directly and indirectly that they were not what a successful graduate at that time looked like. That maybe they should be doing something else, you know? And I mean, that's one of the issues we have with diversity and inclusion, that, you know, when people don't fit into this collective image of what something should look like, we tend to discount them. And we know that that's a problem for society. We know society is better when we acknowledge, you know, the real lived, the authenticness of each person, and that a role or a position doesn't just have one look. And really, what imposter syndrome to some extent is an internalized version of that unconscious bias that we're trying so hard to get rid of in society. So let's not do it to ourselves as well, yeah? So, and we do it all the time. This is the thing with biases. I've just a kind of light-hearted example from myself. I was cleaning my house on the other day, and I don't know what triggered it. Maybe I don't clean that often, but no, maybe it was because it was a Saturday, and when I grew up, like Saturdays mornings, we cleaned our house. That was like the whole family effort to do before we went into the town to do the shopping, and we got donuts from the shop outside the supermarket. Anyway, so I was cleaning, and I had this thought going, here I am, you know, cleaning my house like a proper adult, but like I'm not really an adult. Like I'm like my dad is an adult. I'm just winging it. And then I thought that's just, you know, this makes no sense. And then I went, yeah, I'm in my 40s. I have 3 kids. I have a house. I have a car. I run my own business. But like, they're not even prerequisite to being an adult. Like you just are an adult. Whatever. That's the whole point. Whatever you are is it. Yeah. So if you're being asked to speak at the conference, then you're what somebody who's asked to speak at the conference looks like. Yeah. If you're a team leader, then that's what the team leader looks like. How you feel is what the team leader feels like. Yeah. If you're nominated for a prize, then you are what people who get nominated for prizes and win them look like. And I really think this is one of the most important takeaways that I can give you today, if you can really embrace that in yourself. And it's linked to, oops, sorry, too quick. The next one, which is don't minimize your achievements. And this is a really easy thing to do. We all do it. It's partly cultural, I think, because we're not really supposed to boast or brag, or we don't like the people who do like one small thing and they blow it up like, you know, they won the Pulitzer Prize for something or should have. So somebody goes, oh, great work, you really did well on that project, and go, well, you know, it was really a team effort and I did very little, or whatever it is. And normally when we're told not to do that, it's like an external thing that, you know, to get promoted, you want to make sure that people recognize your achievements or something. But it's also an internal thing, because even if you don't really mean it, even if you think that you did a decent job actually, but if you keep saying that you didn't, it becomes self-talk, even if you don't intend it to be. And it becomes more and more difficult to see yourself as the kind of person who I know can go far in your job, or who really deserve to get that job or promotion or whatever it is. Yeah. So don't deflect the compliments, and really own what you have achieved, because, you know, I bet you it can be quite substantial. And finally, and here's those two graphics I was talking about, don't compare yourself to others. You have no idea what's going on with them. And back to the 70%, they are probably comparing yourself to themselves to you, and everybody else is just seeing in the top cartoon, where there's like, what, 10 people who all look at it, everyone else thinking they all have it together, and they haven't a clue what we're doing, which I think is probably an accurate reflection of where a lot of us are. And then finally, that is the graphic, you know, what we have the first on the left. So we think our knowledge is that little green dot, and we think that everybody else knows so much more. They're engulfing us actually with their extensive knowledge about everything. Whereas in reality, it's more like that flower on the right, where we know a bit, everybody else knows a bit, and there's some overlaps, and then there's some, and that's the beauty of that learning experience. And if we can really embrace that and recognize that our imposter feelings don't have to be that fear that will be found out, that it's just where we are in life, and that it's actually an opportunity to grow rather than an opportunity to either hide or make a lot of changes because we're not comfortable with what we're at. Okay. I'm going to do a final summary of these steps. I really wanted to come up with like a fancy acronym, but I'm not doing too well. If somebody wants to have a go at this afterwards and get back to me, I might even put in the price. But so acknowledge your feelings. What, aside from all the thoughts, you know, what is it that you're really feeling inside of this, and just, you know, hold the space for that feeling. Reframe your thoughts around what it means to feel in that way. Recognize the learning opportunity. You can learn so much from others. It's not a threat, it's a gift, and others can learn from you. Validate your lived experience. You're already living the role that you're in. Don't think that you don't, okay? And same way, don't minimize your achievements, because that feeds into all that negative self-talk, even if you don't mean it to. And finally, don't compare yourself to others. We're all just winging it, really, to be honest. And yeah, thank you for listening to me.